What kind of people are we?
I am in radio contact.
What kind of people are we?
Attention crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. This is a supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals, where we bring you news and tidbits from the world of Trek, also interviews with special guests, and a few little surprises along the way. And the surprise this week is an interview. Last week on the show, I talked with David Mack about an early episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and we discovered how Next Gen took a year or two to really find its feet. And this week, I'm talking with someone who has made it his quest to review the behind-the-scenes documents, pitches, and memos from the earliest inceptions of the various Trek series. I was extremely fortunate to get a chance to talk with Larry Dr. Trek Nemecek. He's a storied fan, author, and podcaster who's been involved in Trek fandom for a number of years, long enough to be considered an old fogey, as you'll hear us talk about in the interview, his words. We also talk about how he went from a NASA geek to a Trek fan. I get his thoughts on Discovery, and we talk about the next generation, if you will, of Trek fandom and their presence online. We talk about the initial Roddenberry free pitch for Star Trek The Next Generation, and we even share our experiences designing sci-fi makeup projects for our respective theater educations. It's a great talk, and stay tuned after for more info on some of Larry's projects. And with that, let's get underway. I'm joined on the show today by Larry Dr. Trek Nemecek. Larry's the author of the books The Star Trek, The Next Generation Companion, and Stellar Cartography, as well as being a former editor of Star Trek Communicator and a contributor to Star Trek Magazine and the official Star Trek website. He's been interviewing the writers, producers, and actors of the Trek universe since 1986 for his audio archival series On Speaker, and he's recently launched his own podcast called The Trek Files, which presents a weekly deep dive into Gene Roddenberry's personal archives. Larry, welcome to the show.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me on.
It's good to have you aboard. I always ask new guests, whenever they come on the show, how they got into Star Trek. Like, when did you first become a fan?
And my famous story is I blame my ninth grade science teacher.
Okay.
I was vaguely aware of Trek being on, but I didn't on NBC, but I didn't run our TV. I was the little kid of the family, and I remember Lost in Space being on, but
Okay.
but not until the rerun era, and my ninth grade teacher, long story short, basically ended a whole little scene with some other people. And she said, "Oh, Larry, don't tell me you don't watch Star Trek." And it was on every day after school at 4. So the rest is history.
I often hear from people who tell me about their history with Trek is that their parents enjoyed it too. And so they find themselves, like you said, you don't control the TV, but it's on at night or maybe in the afternoon, and then they're watching it with their parents. And I guess if your folks weren't into it, then, yeah, how would you even get to it necessarily? How would you even really know about it?
Right. And like I was a big NASA person, and my folks were really good. But no, I mean, it's been later. The geeks won eventually, and cooler parents happened in that way. I had great parents. Right. They indulged. I mean, I had model rocketry and stamp collecting and model building and model railroads and all this stuff, and they indulged me a lot. And eventually, Star Trek got in that mix too. But it's not like they handed off anything to me. But I had been a NASA kid. I was a big NASA person, and I loved history. And that's really where I came. I mean, I read science fiction, although I remember having a thing about all books, all fiction, that I didn't want to read anything unless there were follow-ups to it. It's like, I don't want to invest my time learning characters in a universe, which is funny now to think back. Like, oh, what's the ultimate of the time and still. But that's where I didn't come to Star Trek from like classic science fiction, although I read it at times. I came to it from, which explains a lot, from history and from real science.
Did you have any of the photo novels when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at them right now on my shelf.
Okay.
I have the first 4 in the box.
Oh,
and
all
the
right.
rest of them, yeah.
Well, Trek fandom's, it's still going strong even 50 years later after the debut of the original series. And, of course, now there's a new set of adventures for a next generation in Star Trek Discovery. What did you think of the show's first season finale?
It was a lot of fun. I was close to it. I'd gotten to talk to a few of the writers beforehand. I kind of had a sense. And just, everything is so public now. We all watched. It was not a train wreck because this train got to the station. This plane landed. I said Discovery to me is like on the meta level. Discovery is like if you start a taxi ride and your driver changed 3 times without the car stopping.
Yeah, right.
Right? And the way that Aaron and Gretchen, Alex Kurtz, all those, Ted Harbert, the way that whole staff evolved and eventually landed that plane, where I think if it had been anything else, if it had not been a franchise like Star Trek, and if it hadn't been Star Trek and launching CBS Alexa, that would have imploded a long time ago. But because it was Star Trek and because it was launching this new enterprise, so to speak, they stuck with it and landed it. It's amazing. And I have the things I kind of go about, but I know where they were coming from, and I know the current crop, what they want to do, and I'm excited to see season 2 because I want to see what they do with a clean slate. But having said that, I think it hit a lot of obviously it hit a lot of buttons for a lot of people, and apparently CBS is happy with the numbers they have. So
yeah, numbers are great.
We will see, and it sure lit up a lot of the internet.
Yeah, well, that's what you want in these days. Yeah, I think that it's also a good point that Star Trek's always been collaborative. So the fact that there was maybe whoever was at the wheel of the car changed a couple times, it's always been something that's a group effort. And I always feel like Trek is often at its worst when you've got somebody monolithically saying, no, this is a good idea, and just sort of pushing things through.
Yes, but we've never had I mean, what's different about this time, and everything about Star Trek, every new iteration is always, we've got to do exactly the same thing, but different.
Yeah.
And then you factor into that, like Voyager launching a UPN network and Next Gen launching original syndication, and even the animated series being kind of the most adult series, even though we look at it now as a cartoon, but it was the most adult series on Saturday morning. It's kind of radical when you think of it that way. So on top of just the show itself, you've got the platform, and All Access was controversial to a lot of fans that I'm not going to pay for my, God meant for me Star Trek to be free. I'm not going to pay for it.
Right.
You had all that to get through, and then how would the model hold up, and the delays, and the fact they stuck with it through the delays, on top of just analyzing the show. But to the audience, even the people who were intellectually prepared for it, this whole notion of it being streaming. I mean, we've been watching Game of Thrones. We've been watching serialized, and that's HBO. It's not technically streaming, but we've been watching, cinematic TV and prestige TV and heavily serialized shows. Game of Thrones and Walking Dead are kind of the kings of that right now. And still, it caught people off guard what a Star Trek through that lens would look like. Just the audience experience, much less how the show would play out and all that. And a lot of people's energy got caught up in, oh my God, she dropped the F-bomb. Well, no, it's not going to be a constant. It's kind of like, what was the headline of the week? And now what's interesting to me is, even as it settles, is I think people are still settling on, now that we're out of the valley between the peaks each week, and we can look back at the whole mountain range of the show that season, that story that season, like what is that? What's the there? What are the takeaways now that we're not caught up in that headline of the moment, that crisis of the moment?
Yeah, I think it would have been a bad idea and also antithetical for a show about the future to return to TV and just be on at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night or something like that, to not be streaming and to not engage the community the way it has. Like, I've had a lot of fun following the actors and even the writers, on Twitter and Instagram, and just seeing, updates about this and that.
Well, that's the other dynamic of this. Is the first show that's been in this social media era, as well as like the streaming. So, I mean, the later shows were into, message boards and all that, but everything came in the late aughts. So Twitter and Instagram and all of them, and them having the ability to bring that relevance. I mean, I feel like we've been watching behind the scenes specials from day one with these guys. Mm-hmm, so even, and then after Trek Now is the thing you do, like Talking Dead and all of that. So it's been a whole different dynamic. But I think the other cool thing is veteran fandom
Careful.
from wherever they came in, if they go back 10 years or 20 or 30 or whatever, everybody comes in a little bit with their blinders on, and you forget that there's a whole new generation. Even if they've been a fan already, they weren't spoiled by, if you're in the generation that gets to see an iteration of Trek as it premieres, right? You're there week to week, and oh, well, Cupid is there because there were 2 Robin Hood movies that year, and I remember the Best of Both Worlds summer and all of that. Or you were there with the original letter writing campaign to, for 10 years to get the motion picture. And we're finally back to, this is a generation in 12 years that finally can say, I'm watching new Star Trek. And it's really exciting for people, I say the new kids, some of them are 60, but it's exciting for people to have a fresh Trek, and they don't have to be the ones hearing about it from all the old people debating about, the way it used to be, and I remember that.
Right.
They get to have their fresh, and they are, at least with Discovery, they're in the same place with everybody else. There are no oldsters. Everybody is a newbie with Discovery. They may bring different things to it when they watch it, for sure, and you can sure see that online. But everybody is fresh with this, and I'm excited for all the people who are Discovery is their first Trek, and to see that excitement. And then when people get into the the debates, and a lot of them the critiques are well founded, but then there's just some crazy get off my lawn, you kids stuff going on too.
Right.
But when you see that and you see the kids fight back, or the new viewers fight back, it's exciting. That's kind of my goal for this year, is to talk to people who have only been a fan since Discovery. The Kelvin movies, it's been 10 years since Star Trek 09 was filming and the buzz was out about it.
Right.
And how it was controversial, and has it assimilated into what was its legacy and long term, and will there be another one? But I just want to talk to these people who are totally new, because apparently something in Star Trek is still being done right and still attracting people.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a recap show on my network of Discovery. We did it like a live, right after it aired on Sunday nights. And my co-host on the show is a very young girl who's a college student, and her first Trek was like late Voyager and Enterprise, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I specifically was looking for that perspective, because like you said, we can just grouse all we want in the old folks' home, but this is the new generation coming forward. And as far as us complaining on the internet, we just adopted it. They were born on the internet, and so they can definitely fight back. And I think it's going to be their opinion that proves to be the most important going forward. Right.
Well, especially, and even the dynamic of, even as we are on Facebook and Twitter and all these old people platforms, like there's times that I've decided the last, I know this especially at a convention. Now, there are a lot of people that look at online fandom, they look at even convention live fandom, and think, well, that's the profile of fandom. And I've said for years, there's a great unwashed armchair fan out there that don't go to conventions, or they're not online. They just watch the shows, and now maybe they watch Netflix, or they buy action figures, and maybe they buy books. And I just think there's a great unrepresented, the great normal majority of fandom out there that are driving things that I think we get into a trap, or fans get into a trap if they're, talkers, or they're bloggers, or whatever, influencers, or they just tweet all day. Mm-hmm. And they forget that circle of 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 people around them may not be the best I know I'm different I'm such a background idiot. It took me a long time to realize that not a long time. My first bubble at a convention was, I just thought we'd all go and sit around and talk Star Trek background. Like, what else would you do? And there are people that like the stories. Okay, for stories' sake and characters. Well, of course, that's part of it. But that's what they really get off on. Oh, okay. Today the kids call that shipping, but back in the day it was like, I'm a characters person. But but that was like, that lasted 5 seconds for me. And then I got it. But it was just, we have those blinders and those, we just examining our assumptions. And it's just, every new generation is like that. And every new Star Trek has its 10, 15% loud, whatever is new about it is hard for people to adjust to, or they're so passionate they're worried that something's going to change. And, Next Generation was that way, and Enterprise, and Discovery, and Voyager, and Wrath of Khan was that way with killing Spock.
Yeah.
So that's been fun for me to bring that to people and go, guys, calm down, you new kids, this has happened, let's give it a chance. And anyway, but all those things are in play. But the social media dynamic, the actors, that's what's been really unique about this, and that's why Discovery is of this time. And that's been just amazing to watch, and on the side kind of remind folks who are so. And the other thing that's funny is people who are totally into Game of Thrones and totally into Walking Dead and totally into all the streaming series, and they're so hip and they're so up with it. But the minute they watch Star Trek, it's like they forget the last 12 years of media, and they immediately snap back to their old Star Trek viewing, thinking habits, perception habits. And you could see, it's like, even if you were prepared for it, and a lot of people I don't think were, it took weeks and weeks and weeks for people to go, oh, okay, to get it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that struck you that way.
It does. I think it's something that every show is going to have to go through now, in this new millennium. But I think Discovery has navigated that very well.
Yeah, I think they pioneered. I mean, if they do a spin-off show, if they do it, because CBS All Access is like madly trying to find shows to fill out the year so people don't just drop it. Mm-hmm. And they've got this new Twilight Zone going with Jordan Peele, I think.
That's right.
But it's. I hope they let another season go down so we see what this team does. But it'll take. At least by the end of the second season, we ought, if not already, maybe even, because things move so fast now. It's only a 15-episode season now.
Right.
But about spinoffs and and who might go over and pioneer. Who might go show run another Star Trek to take up the other end of the year when Discovery isn't on.
Yeah.
And what the big plans for Discovery, or Brian Fuller's original idea was for an anthology show that would hop different eras, which would just be awesome.
Right. That
would really blow people. And now you're finally in the business model where that makes sense. Back in the old 26 episodes a season, get all you can out of everything. That was a huge undertaking and an investment, and I knew they'd never do it. But now you can't. And Star Trek's universe is so huge. It's way bigger and more fleshed out than anything out there. I don't care. Star Wars even. Star Wars exists on trading cards and novels. They're just now cranking out films. Star Trek has had that background, which is why the online game works so well. They've had that massive universe that's fleshed out pretty well in a lot of details and a lot of nooks and crannies. And that anthology series totally makes sense. So it's really exciting. After 12 years, I say 12 years of the fallow time, wandering in the desert, it's really exciting.
Yes, the dark ages.
And, yeah.
I was looking at your bio earlier, and I saw that you studied theater in college. I did too, and I read that you chose to do a Tellurite for your makeup class project, which was, I think, ambitious to say the
really
least.
Reading. Well, and then when you're at a small college, no, I did it. No foam prosthetics. No, it was like a nose putty. It was literally nose putty.
Sure.
And I've still got it. It's all hard now, but I kept it. I couldn't, just like I have the Tellurite mask that I wore on. They did an excellent, it was a 4-hour makeup job on the other side of the scale for Phase 2 New Voyages. They were doing vignettes, and it finally was put together. It was mainly a Klingon. It was basically the Klingon version of the Kobayashi Maru. It was a great little idea, and for me, rather than just being another Klingon spy, I said I wanted to do a Tellurite, and I missed a window to do that, and they did this whole Tellurite just so I could be this one bit with one line, but it was awesome. And we even had like an accidental discovery in the makeup where I could huff and the nose trapped just a little bit of air so that when I did it would just flare up a little bit with air.
Sure.
It was like amazing. If you planned that, you couldn't do it. It would never bring it off. Yeah.
I'm somewhat embarrassed to say that I chose to do a Star Wars character for my fantasy makeup project. I ended up doing Vader, but without the helmet, like when he takes the helmet off at the end of Jedi, yeah. So as a guy with that...
Have no shame in your wars necessary.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
As a guy with acting experience, and you're a Trek fan, and specifically a Leonard McCoy fan, it must have been a dream come true to get to play Bones in Star Trek Continues.
Yes. Now I look back, and it's that thing about when it rains, it pours. I had just been contracted to do the Star Trek Stellar Cartography map book set.
Right.
Which is like the first cool out-of-the-box, kind of nonfiction Trek item in ages. And, it takes you back to like getting your blueprints and getting your tech manual and all that. And I was so thrilled about that. And then Vic Mignogna calls me with about 3 weeks ago and says, who I just had barely met, would you do McCoy? We have Chuck Huber can't do this. Would you play McCoy for us? And I'm like, oh, my God, yes. And I had fan film experience. But I said, just as long as it's not, January and February, because I'm starting this other project. He goes, no, it's exactly when we shoot. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. So I didn't bone up as much as I should have. I was working on cartography at night. So I watched those now, and I'd been losing weight, but I wasn't where I am today even. And just all those things, but I couldn't say no to it.
Oh, sure.
And it was amazing. And they just blew me away. I mean, this was not... It was community theater, fan film, but it wasn't. And the professionalism of this group, to find out they didn't all work together all the time, it was just amazing. And you see that from the episode first couple that I was in, and then I stayed a creative consultant, and then all the way to the ending. it just got better and better. And there's a lot of people that love that series now, and they treat it as canon, and whether you want to get off on that or not. But the people involved, the family of that, were just great. And but yeah, as a McCoy fan, the very first thing we did on camera was an MOS scene of surgery. And I was flying in going, now I wonder if they'll have props. Should I have brought my own props? I got then, of course, the nerd boys all had props, but it was such a combination of professionalism and semi-professionalism, like headed there, and the nerd factor. And when you marry those, that's continues because the stories were really well done. It wasn't just people cosplaying with cool props.
Sure,
it was
right.
The stories were great, the editing, all the professional crap, the cinematography and lighting, and all of that was just genius.
Yeah.
And then people doing it mostly in their spare time, but yeah, it was amazing. I just wish I feel like I was a better McCoy in the second episode, even though it was a lot less screen time.
Okay.
But it was amazing, an amazing group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can catch Larry in Star Trek Continues in those episodes. You can see them on YouTube. Let's talk about your audio series, On Speaker, where you share the recorded interviews you've conducted with writers and producers and directors who've worked on Trek shows. When you started doing these interviews, there was no internet, and indeed a lot of those early interviews were done on cassette tape. So my question is, why did you initially start interviewing Trek personnel?
Well, the very first ones I did weren't part of a pattern. I just realized when I was working in news and I went to a convention, it was like, oh, wait a minute, I could take this off if I interviewed these people and come back and right. But then what really kicked all this off was when I got the contract to do the companion, the Next Generation companion book, on 3 months lead time notice till I had to have the first 5 seasons done, which was insane. And of course, in my mind, I'm carrying around the classic Making of Star Trek book by Stephen Whitfield Poe, and thinking I'm going to live up to this. How the hell do I do this in 3 months? And of course, they didn't care. They held off to 5 years of Next Generation before anybody really. People at Pocket, the licensed publisher, really thought they wouldn't lose their shirts. And even then, and they had just done the tech manual too.
Right.
And they printed like 10,000 copies because they didn't know who would buy it. And of course it went and people had been doing, unofficial, unlicensed, but the demand was there.
Yeah.
It was way there. And they were totally underestimating it. And the 10,000 run of the tech manual sold out in like 2 days, and they printed 10,000 more. And those were, it's like, come on guys, this show has since Best of Both Worlds, the 4th season, the 5th season, it's gone crazy. It's the hottest thing out there.
Right.
And it's fresh and new, first new Star Trek, first sci-fi, first all this in ages. There was nothing going on, and they underestimated. So anyway, so the companion comes out. I did wind up getting 6 months to do it because Leonard Nimoy was mad at licensing over another issue, and he wouldn't approve his images. So the biggest news in 5 years of Next Gen was Spock being on Next Generation. And
right.
we couldn't. The first couple of printings didn't have the Spock photos. It was like everything from Unification 2-parter. Except the Spock photos, which was kind of amazing. But that got remedied. But, I learned so much. I came out. I did not have I thought I'd have a red carpet rolled out for me. I didn't. I had to meet everybody on my own.
Okay.
I mean, I could fill a book with the stories of doing this. But the best thing that happened was I did have to do everything on my own. I had to get people's trust.
Yeah.
I did have to network. I did a lot. I came out for a week. But that was not, I had 3 months to get this done. I barely talked to anybody. I went back, did a lot of phoning, decided that since the show was going on, we'd update it. The next year I'd come back and do more, and I did. But taking the long way and doing it on my own and getting people's faith in me and my honesty and my honesty with them about material and, even, private conversations and things, and the trust there, that just grew and grew and grew until I was, and I wanted to talk to everybody, even not so much the actors, but the people that really made the decisions. And even though the first one was done so quickly, the last, as you notice the book still, because they did not let me go back and fill out the first few years. But the more the book goes along, it's less about what I found and researched in my original interviewing. The 4th and 5th years are best, and then we added, additions and got the 6th, 7th year, and then all 4 movies, and those are really fleshed out. In fact, we're having to cram stuff in. And then when Next Gen ended, they were, DS9 was already overlapping, and Voyager was moving along, and we decided to move to LA from Oklahoma, and my wife had a temp job on Voyager and got to work. She worked the first 5 years in the writers' building. And with all of that, I said, it's silly to stop talking to these people just because my book is done. So I mean, eventually I was working on Fact Files. Eventually I edited the magazine. But basically, after everyone knew me, it was almost like a annual ritual. Sure. And I learned the best time to talk was go in at the end of the year when they were de-stressed, no deadlines, but before they, flushed their own memory core for the hiatus.
Right.
Came back all stressed about the new year. And that was the sweet spot to get people. And I learned that the hard way the first year. But after that was – so, yeah, I've got 500-600 hours here with everybody. And it's from the day. And I realized about 10 years ago – and I use them, for writing articles and reference and going back to. And I thought, my God, these are just a resource on their own. I should start digitizing them. And I didn't go digital till like 2000, about the time the show Enterprise went off. So yes, the bulk of everything is on tape. I've barely scratched the surface of getting them digitized. But so the CDs are my first answer to let's get these digitized and get them out there.
Sure.
And to a theme. And then that's the same, that kind of, there's more here for people. My God, Star Trek fans have no idea how much Star Trek they have no idea about.
Yeah, sure.
And that was the idea behind Portal 47, finally, when I figured out how I could do it and what that would be like.
Speaking of archives, your new podcast, Trek Files, debuted in January, and each week you're examining Trek-related documents from Gene's personal archives, and listeners can also check out and get a copy of those documents on your Facebook page. That's an amazing privilege to dig into Gene's archives. That's like candy store material right there.
It is. Well, yes, big thanks to Rod and then John Champion, who co-hosts their Mission Log podcast, for coming to me and saying, we'd like you to do this. Yeah. So, I mean, I've known Rod for years since he kind of came back as his mother's health went down. He kind of stepped up and took the family business on. And it's bite-sized. It's like 15 minutes, so it's easy to do for me, but we could do several at a time. I have guests. We've had Dorothy Fontana and Dave Rossi, and we're just getting started. And we can do several with each person. So on one hand, it's very doable. But it's a completely untapped resource there. And it's a way to get, whether it's a 1-page letter or it's a 15-page memo, it's there. And the coolest thing is, to me, it's something that's different. There are so many good podcasts out there and so many shows and some not so great. But I didn't want to do, for years, I mean, I've enjoyed going on as a guest and talking, but I didn't want to do my own unless I could bring something fresh and different to it and maybe take it to a new level. And this is certainly, wasn't expecting this, but it was certainly one way to do that. And I'm very grateful to Rod. Yeah. So it's HQ'd on Facebook, and yeah, people can get the document as well as listen to us talk about it.
Is there a holy grail of archival documents for you? Like something that was very pivotal in Trek's development, or even something that puts rest to a debate or contradicts a persistent rumor about the development of Trek?
Well, I didn't know about it, but now in hindsight, this one that we had a couple of weeks ago, the 1986 would-be premise for a Next Generation show,
yes,
it kind of kicked Gene into going, okay, I'll come back and do it myself because you're sure not doing this. That was amazing. I mean, I literally fell off my chair when jaw dropped the whole thing when we came across that. And I'm glad. I knew this would make news, but not everyone. And some of them are known. We just go back and like the original pitch that became The Cage and the Writer's Guide. And Rod wanted us to be foundational because part of this is for history's sake, for fans that know the history, but also it's like, what's just the DNA of Star Trek? And what are shades of Gene? What are shades of the shows, the things he had a hand in through his, the 60s, 70s, and 80s up through Next Gen? And how does it affect Star Trek through the years and today? We even had one that like reverberated with Discovery big time, literally.
Yeah,
a phrase. Right. And that's been amazing. So the Holy Grail, I would still, I don't know. You got me flat-footed on that one. Part of this, the fun here is just finding things like that that you didn't know or you knew they were kind of in there, but were they really on paper? Is there really a smoking gun,
sure,
for this aspect?
I'd like to see, if they exist, the hundreds of memos that I'm imagining from Shatner or his agent about the fact that Kirk is the star of this show and not this Spock guy, or the on-paper negotiations about Nimoy trying to get a raise when he was negotiating for one in between the first two seasons.
Yeah. I mean, Bob Justman and Herb Solo kind of got into that in their book a little bit, but yeah, it's tantalizing. That's what's amazing too. But we'll pull something out and it's not just what Gene wrote or something that's been published, but it's like the notes in the margin and what was marked out. And,
right.
And we don't get into that so much, but when you see the scanned document, you get to see that. So
Sure.
our version of it. So yeah, we are going to get into a lot of unexplored territory in the 70s, when all that era of here's a movie, nope, can't do it. Oh, how about this? Nope, can't do it. That
Right.
whole back and forth movie in flux revival time.
Yeah.
And some were Gene's and some were not, and he's commenting on all of them and reacting. We're going to have a lot of material from The God Thing and from Planet of the Titans.
Okay, cool.
And a lot of that is going to be coming out soon.
Yeah.
So
I was talking to David Mack recently on the show, and we were talking about the TNG episode, The Schizoid Man. One of the topics that we lighted on was how Next Gen hadn't really made it or found itself yet at that point in the second season. And I brought up the recent documentary, Chaos on the Bridge. And there's this figure throughout the Chaos documentary that stands out as not exactly a villain, not quite a hero, kind of the tough love dad of the Enterprise. And it's John Pike, who was the studio president. And without reading the titles in the doc, you can absolutely tell in this documentary who's a writer or a creative and who's a suit, because he's fairly unfiltered. And you guys touched on him in your recent episode of the Trek Files. You and Rossi went over that document. And he sends this letter and the attached documents to Roddenberry saying, well, here's our pitch. What do you think? And I like the fact that you guys talked about how it was leverage, hey, we're going to do this with or without you. So if you don't like this, you better come on board.
Right. Well, I mean, on one hand, you're thinking if it was just a goad, if it was just a poke at him,
yeah,
then they could have thrown a page out there. But it went on for 6, 7, 8 pages. They had they had a pilot premise, and then the arc of the first season, or the premise of the show.
Sure.
It was a lot of detail there, and I asked Greg Strangis about it, who wound up doing their War of the Worlds show when they were doing all the original syndication bits in there, and Jeff Hayes is on that memo. He wound up doing their Mission Impossible redo for a few years. And Greg Strangis wasn't too interested in talking about it. Okay. I think he was kind of burned, because I really don't think it was a ploy. I think they had a team ready to go, thinking, because this was 86 and Gene died in 91, and he had mini strokes, by the second, third season of Next Gen, and his health went way down. Yeah. But and Bob Justman told me he and Gene kind of looked at each other like, "Are you up for this, old man? Are you up for this, old man?"
Okay.
And because Gene was out of shape, really. They were talking about how if he walked 20 or 30 feet, he was huffing and puffing, and he got back into physically and stamina got back into shape on the ramp up to the show, but they really didn't know he could have just sat home and taken his 5 or 10% or whatever and not been involved, but this, and if that had happened, they were ready to go with this. This was not just a ploy.
Yeah.
These guys were ramped up to go. And so that's, in the past it'd been this, they had these ideas, and I said, nope, you're not going to do it without me. And that would be how this whole thing was covered. But now we've got the guts of it here. It's Chaos on the Bridge is awesome. Leonard Mageless is the one that, when I was, and I did this book so quickly, and we really didn't get into the guts, and it was still in the raw time before the emotional comfort zone of the statute of limitations, had run out. Sure. And people were like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about Leonard Mageless," or "He made me so mad." Well, what? Oh, I don't want to talk about it. And Dorothy Fontana and David Gerald and all those folks that were there, and now people are talking about it, and so good on them for getting that out. I would have loved to have had that detail in the companion, but we would at least talk about creative differences.
Differences, right?
Yeah. I didn't want to sugarcoat anything, so we did as much as we could at the time.
Yeah,
and did more when I could.
I feel like Gerald would have a lot to say about Leonard Mageless.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what blogging and the internet's for.
That's
now.
right.
So, there we are.
As we wrap up here, there's something else I always ask guests of the show, and that's who's your favorite captain and why? Can your space dad beat up my space dad?
See, now here's you're talking about me and fandom. I never had that whole, if the Enterprise and the Millennium Falcon got in a fight, or if Han Solo and Captain Kirk, or if Kirk and Picard got in a fight, I just those kind of things never occurred to me I just go, they're all, or people would argue over it. Now over the years, I've got shows I lean to. It's like when you had the original series from almost the beginning, 79 shows for 20 years, it's kind of hard to get away from the emotional tie of that. And like I say, you never forget your first.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Everybody comes in with, like we were saying earlier, everybody comes into the Trek. And, the Next Generation, I waded through several times for all my books. And DS9 had this great, incredible cast, and Enterprise was, I don't know if that was always executed the way I would have had, but that was the idea I wanted them to do for 10 years. So, it's all of that. So I have a hard time with these favorites, this and that and the other thing. I don't really have a favorite captain. I mean, McCoy is my favorite character from the original series, and I guess, and I love D. Kelly. Just even as a kid in Oklahoma, I just had the sense that of all the actors and all the cast, I mean, you loved all the characters, but D. Kelly was the one I wanted to go out and have dinner with.
Oh, absolutely.
When I was old enough to think about that. And I, had the chance once or twice before he passed, which was awesome, and I treasure those times. But so sorry, I'm going to wimp out on you.
That's fine. I don't even like the idea of the conflict, and I don't want to foster it. But something that I like to do, I like the thought experiment of taking a captain and replacing them with somebody else. So like, what would happen if Cisco was in Darmok, instead of Picard or something like that?
Yeah. No. I mean, there's a huge guilty chunk of me that goes, what the hell kind of fan are you if you aren't getting into these kinds of things? So it's just hard for me to make the decisions like that. Yeah. I guess that's just, I have plenty of strong opinions about a lot of things, but yeah, I'll just, the easy thing, what's fun is to watch time and the pendulum swing on all these things about Trek and how things are in style and they're not in style. And, the 60s show was old hat and cardboard and Christmas lights and plywood when Next Gen was cool, and then Next Gen became the 80s show with the therapist and carpet on the walls, and the 60s were retro cool again, and just watching the styles swing in and out, and to watch the rise of Janeway's Army, I call it, and Voyager's rebirth and DS9's rebirth. Now people say, oh, it's the series that stood the test of time the most,
Right.
And it's really Discovery's forebear among all this, but that every 10, 15 years we revisit these things and change. So that's been amazing to me to watch. Just watching the watchers is
yes,
kind of fun for me. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We didn't even get to talk much about Con of Wrath or talk more about Portal 47, so I'll have to have you back on at some point to talk about those.
I'd love to do that. People can go to the website though and read.
Yeah, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so LarryNemecek.com is the hub of everything. And just real quick, Portal47.net is, like I said, kind of the end-all, be-all of me figuring out how to get more Star Trek that I knew I was aware of, and the people that I knew, and people who aren't going to turn up on conventions or in an interview anytime soon. Sure. Getting that out there. And it's like a mini-con, in several ways every month. It's online or live. It's like a mini-con all year long. So that's kind of been the thing I've been wrestling with here in the fallow times, and now that we're back, and I'm really proud of that. And Con of Wrath, yes, my documentary, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to wrap it up this year. I swear to God. Yes, we are.
Awesome. So yeah, Portal 47, learn from Dr. Trek online. Thanks again for talking with me today.
Aaron, thanks so much for having me on. This has been amazing. Thanks.
Thanks to Larry for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun. And if you like what you heard, you can hear him every week on Trek Files, where he looks at some of these seminal documents from Trek's history, many of which come straight from the archives of Gene Roddenberry. You can find his show and other Trek programs at podcasts.roddenberry.com. I know, the prime directive of podcasting. Don't send your listeners to other podcasts, but we're one big happy fleet. So let's consider this a personnel transfer. Get informed and entertained at the same time by Trek Files. It's a great show. You can see Larry as Bones in Star Trek Continues on YouTube, and you can hear more from Larry at LarryNemecek.com, and you can check out Portal 47, Larry's service that provides you with an in-depth insider's look at the world of Trek. It's like a miniature convention that comes right to your inbox every month. Check it out at LarryNemecek.com/Portal47. If you're shaky on the spelling, don't worry. I've included links to everything in the show notes, and I've included a link to Larry's Trek Files episode about John Pike's gene-free next-gen pitch. Larry's books, The Star Trek The Next Generation Companion and Stellar Cartography, can be found on Amazon.com, and you can get there by clicking the book links in the show notes or by clicking our Amazon banner on enterprisingindividuals.com. And I recommend bookmarking that link. Whenever you go to Amazon, by clicking through one of our links, whatever you buy, be it a physical or a digital book, a kutluksh or a Horgon, we get a little something from that transaction at no extra cost to you. That's right, by following your passions, you're helping make ours possible, keeping this show going and keeping the warp drive lit. If you go to enterprisingindividuals.com, the Amazon banner is on the right. You can't miss it. Click on that and then purchase the Next Generation Companion or whatever catches your eye, and you're helping support the show. But what if you're thinking, Cap, I've got all I need from Amazon right now, at least until that How to Serve Kelpians cookbook comes out. Well, don't worry. You can still support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/EISTPOD. It's there that you can sign up to be a crew member for the show for a small monthly donation, and you can get access to our exclusive subscriber content like our live shows and my DS9 rewatch recaps, plus show merchandise and much more. Just head to patreon.com/EISTPod. And you can watch a live broadcast of our first Enterprising Individuals live show from Convergence 2017, where I'm joined by comics artist Christopher Jones and authors Patrick Tomlinson, Naomi Kritzer, and William Leisner to talk about The Wrath of Khan. That was a great show, and we're doing it again this year. At Convergence 2018, we're talking about the TNG episode The Measure of a Man with Melinda Snodgrass, the writer of the episode. And you can be on the front line and be the first to see those live shows by supporting the program at patreon.com/EISTPod. Become a member of the crew today. And as always, anything you can contribute to the show will be appreciated and will help keep us flying. Thanks. Well, what else? No time for news this week, but I did want to say that William Shatner is alive and well. I guess someone tried to start a hoax that he had passed away a week ago, maybe trying to get out ahead of April Fools. But joke's on you, he's still kicking and tweeting, of course. I hate unclassy April Fool's jokes, and I prefer ones like pretending that your podcast is a show about Esperanto and media, but that's just a randomly selected example. I also wanted to say congratulations to Terry Farrell and Adam Nimoy, who tied the knot last week. Many happy years to the both of you. And does this mean that Nicole DeBoer has to take over for Terry in a few years? I hope not. Just kidding. Congratulations. Our top comment on social media from the past week comes in response to a picture that I had tweeted out from MiniCon 53. I was attending MiniCon in Minneapolis this past weekend and representing Enterprising Individuals and Just Enough Trope, our parent network, and I was speaking on a few panels. And when I stopped by the charity auction table, I saw a songbook for Irish tin whistle tunes. And, of course, I had Inner Light on the brain, and I tweeted a picture of it with a caption that said, "So that's Picard's secret." To which Twitter user Alexander at Mr_Picard replied, "Oh no, you found out," accompanied by that picture of Captain Picard looking shocked. Shocked, I say, mildly, over his teacup. Alexander describes himself on Twitter as Jean-Luc's loving husband, massive fan of Sir Patrick Stewart, Daniel Stewart's #1, child of the 80s, Star Trek TNG is love. I think that applies for all of us. And he also runs Patrick Stewart News at Pat Stewart News on Twitter, which I just subscribed to. So thanks for your tweet, Alexander. For having the top comment, you win one of those cells that Picard was trapped in the episode Allegiance, while his doppelganger was roaming the ship and making toasts and stuff. I'm not saying put Patrick Stewart in it, but it's got the little food pucks and everything. It's ready to go. Remember, listeners, you can tweet to us or message the show and get updates about what we're up to at MiniCon or Convergence and elsewhere. Just go to facebook.com/EISTPod or find us at EISTPod on Twitter or through our social media links on enterprisingindividuals.com. You can also reach the show at EISTPod@gmail.com with feedback and suggestions or to just say hello. We're waiting to receive your transmission. And that's it for this supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals. If you're an Apple Podcast listener and you haven't yet, why not look us up on Apple Podcasts and make sure that you're subscribed to the show. Also, give us a little review if the spirit moves you, and give us a rating at the very least. We'd appreciate it. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, you can still subscribe to the show on Google Play or Stitcher or wherever you get our show from. And if you leave positive comments and ratings and reviews on those platforms as well, we would be eternally grateful. Next time on Enterprising Individuals. Who can you trust? A captain who suspends the Prime Directive whenever it suits her? A Vulcan whose stoicism might mask his subterfuge? A first officer who's already betrayed one cause? A doctor that's not even real? Who can you trust? Dr. David A. Banks joins the show next week to look at an episode of Voyager that sees 7 of 9 question everything she thinks she knows about the crew of Voyager, and she'll stop at nothing to peel away the layers of obfuscation that hide a sinister truth. It's the Voyager Conspiracy, next time on Enterprising Individuals. And until then, I'm your Captain Caliban signing off and saying live long and prosper.